The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Chapter 14. Proteus's Decision, Windows Window into the Past, and Aspect 1. Cypress and OverSoul7 sat nonchalantly on a pile of rock on the rim of the hill overlooking the dig of the tellers. I lost myself in Lydia's life, then Maha's, then Joseph's, 7 was saying. It's great to surface again. I'm worried about Joseph. I mean, he is forming his own reality, but he doesn't know it, of course, and he thinks the Hosentoffs are tricking him. I take it that Joseph is still your favorite, Cypress asked. Well, no, not really. He's just more like me. Or he seems like me. Anyway, he reminds me of myself more and more. He gets lost in his paintings now, as I get lost in my personalities. And you know, before my examination, he didn't paint like that, and I just peeked into my personalities to help them out now and then. I mean, now sometimes I think they own me, and Joseph's worried about losing his freedom. Well, I don't relish losing mine, either, in their experiences. Is that what happens? Cypress was smiling. Well, it's certainly what seems to happen, 7 said, testily. It's easy for you to talk in your position, 7 broke off in consternation. Cypress was gone. Cypress! Cypress! He called. Yes? 7 blinked. That was Cypress's voice, but it wasn't just that she dematerialized her image. He could have perceived her presence in any case. Over here, she said. 7 frowned with his 14-year-old male face and swirled around. Cypress was blinking on and off, or here and there, disappearing entirely in her essence, and then returning. Exactly what was she doing? Taking herself out of his experience and then re-emerging in it? All right, come back, he said. She reappeared beside him, looking rather severe. She said, When you talk about my position, you aren't thinking straight, as that little performance of mine should show you. Obviously, my position is a changing one. It isn't static, and neither is yours, or Joseph's, for that matter. I think I understand, 7 said, but why are we here? Window is going to put on a demonstration for Proteus, Cypress said. But afterward, I want you to tell me what you think the significance of that demonstration is. But Window isn't even one of my personalities, 7 cried. And if the demonstration is for Proteus, then Proteus should be tested, not me. This is a particularly important part of the examination, Cypress interrupted, so stop objecting and listen. You have a very adventurous nature, Window was saying to Proteus, but because you were taught to curb your sense of wonder, you're often frightened of where your curiosity might lead. Story's abilities worry you because you're going to have to open your mind to them, or reject Story, and you don't want to do that either. I was brave enough to come here, Proteus said. Exactly. So I hope you'll be courageous enough to accept what you find. Well, I accept you, Proteus said, with a shrug. And I'm ready to accept whatever abilities you have as, real. That's only the beginning, Window replied. I'm going to take you on a tour. Story was right. You are going to show me around, finally. I was afraid that you were hiding something, Proteus said. He grinned. Already he liked Window better than he did his own father, a fact that struck him as very strange. I've been a little disappointed, he added. This part of the dig is nice enough, but you've kept me isolated, really, he broke off. He'd also seriously wondered whether or not there was anything else to see, and whether Window was lying. Now he blushed, remembering. Window stood there, ready to leave, when the door burst open. Story ran into the room. There's another search party coming. I don't know why, but they're more determined than they were the last time. The news came from one of our outposts. I didn't wait to get the details, but they're beginning to think that Proteus was kidnapped. Window whirled around. His face was white. Did you take him around yet? Story asked. Window shook his head. We're just ready to leave. You weren't going to show him all... No, Window said quickly. Proteus stared at both of them. You were hiding something back then, he said accusingly. I thought you were. He has to be found, then. He has to go home, Story said. He doesn't know what's here yet, and he's got to promise not to tell what he does know. Otherwise, they'll just keep on looking. Confused, Proteus looked from one side to the other. Story was speaking so quickly that it was hard to follow what she said. Proteus spoke as empathetically as he could. I'm not going home. You can't make me. If you do, then I'll tell them that something strange is going on here, and they'll come back to investigate anyway. They were paying little attention to him. Story just kept staring at Window. She said again, Proteus has to be found. Or never found, Window said. Story shook her head. That would be even more difficult. He's not able to make the choice. Proteus was furious. Stop talking about me as if I'm not here, he said angrily. I have a right to know what's going on. Story cried urgently. Proteus, we're just trying to save you from having to make a decision without knowing what's involved. Till now, you couldn't really do us much harm. You hadn't seen anything. At any time, you could decide to go home, and we could just abandon you topside and no one would ever find us. But now, you're going to have to stay with us for good. Never see your home again. Or leave at once with a suitable explanation. Like what? Proteus demanded. Well, we have the dig above. That they know about. You could say that you wandered in there. No, then we'd get in trouble for not notifying the proper authorities. Wait. Window closed his eyes. He tried to lose the sense of urgency and desperation that had been closing in on him. And as he did, his inner vision cleared. There were 3 copters this time. How could one boy threaten an entire project? He wondered wearily. For now he saw that the searchers were far more persistent than they had been. Then he discovered the reason. Your mother's a member of the search party, he said. She has some kind of executive position, doesn't she? My mother? Are you sure? Her name is Amanda. She has brown hair, blue eyes, and olive skin. She's 39. She called you Proto. When she thought of me, she called me Proto, Proteus said. She didn't pay that much attention to me usually. Well, she's thinking about you now, Window said soberly. Proteus was so surprised that he didn't know what to do or say. Window has seen, that much was obvious. What Window said was true. So maybe Story's tales were true, but in a different way. He said wildly, I could say that I'd pleaded with you not to notify the authorities or tell them that your communication system went on the blink. He could say that about the communications, Story said. It just might work. Could we trust you to be quiet about the little you do know or suspect? Window asked. Of course, Proteus said. I give you my word. Story stared at him. A few minutes ago, that's not what you said. I was angry at you for talking around me. I didn't mean that I'd really do anything to get you in trouble. Then it's your choice, Window said. Either you return and we'll still be taking a chance, or you stay. If you leave, we can only hope that your story's convincing enough. I can have our communications cut temporarily and let them come here. We'll be ready. The men at the dig took care of him till help could arrive, Story said. That story would work to our advantage. To return home, Proteus was almost sick to his stomach with indecision. Despite his resentments, he kept seeing his mother's image in his mind's eye. The green uniform, beautifully severe short hair, the almost military bearing. And yet, no, he shouted, I won't be dragged home, even if it means never going back. I won't go unless it's the only way that you'll feel safe, so somebody better think of something. There's only one place where you'll be safe if you stay, and where we'll be safe, no matter what. No one knows where it is but the tellers, Window said. But if you go there with us, then you'll have to stay and join your fate with ours. Right now, there's no time to explain. You'll have to go it blind, if you've really decided. He paused, then said quickly, They're landing by the outer dig. I see it, mentally. Again Proteus thought, his mother, so close. He decided to leave home once. Now it seemed he was going to have to make up his mind all over again, while knowing that his mother was only a short distance away. Nothing else had offered this tremendous point of contrast. Yet all the deep feelings that had propelled his initial flight now reasserted themselves. I'm ready. I'll go with you, if you'll take me. If I won't cause you more trouble than I'm worth. His eyes were smarting. Story and Window were already at the door. All right, Window said. Hurry. They ran down the corridor past all the rooms with which Proteus was familiar. The wall at the end of the corridor opened as they approached. Proteus gasped with surprise. He'd been in the hall often. No door was apparent. Now it closed soundlessly behind them. It's all operated from below, Window said quickly. They were in a very small room with rock walls. 2 large rocks moved back. Proteus followed Story and Window inside, and they began to climb down a very steep staircase hewn out of rock. This time the stairs seemed endless, but the way was illuminated dimly. though Proteus saw no lamps or torches. When they walked downward for some time, the steps evened out until they gradually formed a rocky corridor with a downward incline. Neither window nor story spoke, so Proteus asked no questions. He was growing more and more excited, even while he realized that they were steadily progressing beneath the earth's surface. What would he find? What secret project could there possibly be that window and story considered so important? The corridor ended with a final rock door that opened for them automatically, as had the others. Now they were obviously inside a gigantic rock building of incredible age and richness. Here also the walls were lit by that same dim illumination. Drawings of animals, birds, and buildings filled the walls. Proteus eyed them with awe. They seemed alive, waiting. Window and story still hadn't spoken, yet Proteus had the strangest feeling that they carried on some inner kind of dialogue. What kind of people were they, actually, he wondered. Story was approximately his age, yet sometimes she acted much older, while on other occasions she was so playful and innocent that she might have been a 10-year-old. And Window, why did he trust Window so? Proteus shivered slightly. In this odd building, both Window and Story seemed like strangers to him. He looked down. The rock floor here was smooth and clean, yet the air was filled with a sweet mustiness that was impossible to describe. The cleanliness itself disturbed him. It didn't seem to be fresh, but rather ancient, a cleanliness somehow preserved from the past. Window and Story turned into another corridor, and Proteus followed. This time Proteus paused briefly. The door before them was heavy and old. Why didn't it creak as it opened? A series of steep upward steps led to a rock landing, and here Proteus stood motionless, unable to speak, amazed at the scene before him. He'd taken it for granted that they would still be underground. Now before him stretched a lush valley, ringed by towering cliffs that formed a very wide cone shape open far above. The valley was so enclosed by the cliffs that the only entry seemed to be from the wide circle of sky above. Through that opening the sun poured so brightly that Proteus had to look away, because his eyes were still so accustomed to the dimness of the underground corridors. "Welcome," Window said, and though he had seemed vital enough before, now he seemed to come truly alive, snap into focus, be himself, in a way that took Proteus completely by surprise. The same transformation came over Story. She smiled at him fully, as she hadn't earlier, her whole pose expressing a deep satisfaction. It was obvious that Story and Window had come home. Proteus didn't have time to wonder further about the change in his companions. Too much competed for his attention. Everywhere there were tall green trees, grass, flowers, buildings of the oddest designs, and all in the richest of colors. Yet in the distance ruins were clearly apparent, in various stages of reconstruction. Piles of rock glittered in the sun. Bright shoots of green licked at them like green flames. At first Proteus didn't notice the people. Then he saw the figures moving around the ruins, and at the same time men and women began to emerge from the buildings. They came in twos and threes, small groups from the multicolored triangular structures that were arranged in a semicircle around what seemed to be a general square. It was only then that Proteus thought of turning around. Directly behind him was a pyramid, through which they must have emerged. But at the last
we came up,
Proteus said. How can that be? Window smiled. We'll explain later. For now, meet the tellers. How long has this place been here? Why hasn't it been discovered? Proteus was so filled with questions that he was in a daze for the next few hours, in which several hundred people surrounded them, greeting Window and Story with great warmth, and listening to Window's explanation of Proteus' presence. Proteus himself began to feel as if he'd also returned home. Everything seemed new and unbelievable, yet familiar. It was twilight on earth as Proteus had never seen it before, except in his dreams. How sterile and insignificant the floating city seemed by contrast, he thought, remembering the artificial trees and plastic grass. He and Window strolled past the buildings as Window pointed out the sights. This place was ancient long before the time of Rome, Window said, and it's coming alive again. There's so much to tell you that I don't know where to begin. Our discoveries, for one thing. That's a story in itself. We're learning to activate mechanisms that
we
would never have been dreamed of. And they're all here in instructions that date back to the time of the cavemen. This was a fantastic civilization. We don't know yet how it began, but we hope to find out. It flourished while most Earthmen were still savages. We're still learning, finding new records. Look, Proteus gasped. Above, in the wide circle of sky in the center of the cliffs, a few stars shone and a dull moon. Here before them the valley narrowed slightly into what had obviously been a kind of courtyard. Between patches of grass, broken-colored tiles glittered. In several places the grass had been uprooted, bearing whole areas of clear shining mosaics. Each fitted into the other so cleverly that it was impossible to tell where the divisions were between them. Window stood there and closed his eyes. I'll tell you what I see with my inner vision, he said. Each time I come here and look inward, I see something else, a further detail, another piece of information that tells us where to look, that brings us one step closer. Window's mental visions shimmered, blurred, then cleared. Describing what he was seeing, he said softly, This was a courtyard, as you can probably tell. The mosaics covered the whole area, the floor of the valley. The walls and drawings are very important, but while we've discovered some very strange things about them, there's a lot we don't know. They do contain a key that's vital. We're sure of that. But wait, I'm seeing something new. A young woman stands in the courtyard now. Proteus frowned. Suddenly he felt nervous and uncomfortable. He stared at Window, whose head was flung back, his face expectant and yet passive, his long humped nose sensitive as an animal's. Proteus wanted to interrupt, but he didn't dare to. She's beautiful, black. She's looking at the drawings, Window sighed audibly. She's disappearing. I'm losing my focus. I suppose she could be the girl Story told us about, the one who was supposed to threaten the tellers through me somehow. Proteus spoke resentfully, almost unwillingly. I wish you hadn't seen her, he said. Everything was so great. I still think that Story's tale was... Distorted, Window said, smiling. His eyes opened. It might have been. The threat she saw could have been the second search party. She could have perceived the black girl separately and just put the two together. That's possible. She's young and still learning to use her abilities. Well, I just wish she wouldn't practice on me, Proteus retorted. He looked around. Now the ancient courtyard seemed alive and glowing in an unfriendly way. He no longer felt that he'd come home. Sensing Proteus' mood, Window led him back toward the buildings and the people. Seven and Cypress stayed. They'd watched the whole day's proceedings. Seven was incredulous himself. Window saw Maha, of course, he said. Do you understand now? Cypress asked. Yes, I do, Seven cried out triumphantly. Maha and Proteus live in the same physical place in different times. At least they do now that Proteus' journey has taken him there. What a pity that they don't know each other or see what's happening. I wonder if I could possibly explain it too. Seven broke off. He was growing slightly dizzy, or his environment was. He wasn't sure which. Objects seemed to shift focus, become blurred, then become clearer again than they'd been in the first place, yet oddly different. For a moment, OverSoul7 was in the courtyard of the speakers, standing next to Maha in 35,000 BC. The mosaics were bright and dazzling. The cliffs shot upward, but there was a difference. What was it? Maha! Maha! He shouted. Did someone call me? I thought someone called my name. Maha swung around, obviously astonished. It's me, the old man, Seven said. But the ground shimmered once more. Seven could no longer see Maha. The cliffs rose as before, but now the grass covered most of the tiles, and where the rubble was cleared away, the tiles were chipped and darkened. Cypress was waiting for him. Now, hold my hand, she said, and remember, you'll have to answer some questions about this later on. I've got some questions now, Seven objected. Seven, pay attention. Seven sharpened his own 14-year-old male image, made the face as elfin as he could, and grinned. In a flash, Cypress turned into another 14-year-old male image and grinned back. The next moment she had the woman's form again. Now, she said, back to your examination. Look at one tile. Any one will do. Seven chose a chipped blue and orange one, with a design partially showing. The rest had broken off. Do you see it clearly? Yes. Now, this is the way the tile appears to your present focus of perception. You must change your focus to see its other aspects. You can stay here. Do you follow me? I'm trying to, Seven said. Cypress sighed. Those in Maha's time use one specialized focus to perceive their reality, and that tile. Do you remember how the tiles looked a moment ago when you slid into Maha's courtyard? I'll never forget, Seven said. Then keep moving your consciousness a notch at a time while watching that particular tile until it looks like the tiles did then. A notch at a time? OverSoul7 said, frowning. All right, if that doesn't quite make sense to you, then do this. Imagine that your consciousness is a light, which it is, of course, and keep turning it in different directions, but very slowly. The rotating light will pick up the tile in its different aspects. Stop when you think you recognize Maha's tiles. I think I've got the idea now, 7 said. Now don't rush me. He stared at the tile. How perfect it was in its way, he thought. How unique, even chipped and darkened. The tail of some animal or fish all wiggly set in the stone. Blink, Cypress said. 7 blinked, then looked back at the tile. It wrinkled. It was curling at the edges, diminishing, disappearing at a rapid rate. You're going too fast in that direction, Cypress cautioned. That's how the tile appears in future centuries, in a manner of speaking. Go back the other way. Almost in a panic, 7 watched the tile disappearing. He tried to reverse his focus, which was difficult, because he didn't know yet how he was doing what he was doing. Come back, he shouted at the tile. Suddenly he felt a great love for it. How precious it was. Yet despite his efforts, it continued to wrinkle and diminish. In the back of his mind somewhere, he thought he heard Cypress' delightful laughter. He wondered angrily what she was laughing at, and just then he found the feel of his consciousness and pulled it back to the left of his inner vision. Miraculously, the tile shimmered, stabilized, then began to grow thicker. Portions of the design began to appear. Then 7 understood. When he saw the design completed, the tile would be as it was in Maha's courtyard. Then he recognized the right tile, or thought that he did. The design was completed, all the chips restored, a blue fish with a strange long tail. The tile looked new, too new. Before 7 realized what had happened, a brown hand appeared on the top of the tile, laying it, 7 saw, shocked by the hand's intrusion. He was tempted to fall through and go backward before the tile's time. Instead, he backtracked. The hand disappeared, and the tile remained. When it looked right to him again, he held the focus of his consciousness and just observed it. Was Maha near? Maha! Instantly he was dizzy again. In the same instant he saw Maha quite clearly, standing only a few feet away. Enlarging his inner vision without being sure how he did so, he saw the ancient courtyard, but unmistakably, vividly, and simultaneously he also saw the courtyard as it existed in the 23rd century A.D. The tile in the same physical place showed its 2 separate aspects at once, not one before the other. And as his vision widened, the 2 courtyards were transposed one upon the other. Cypress' voice seemed to come from a great distance. This is just one hint of what's possible, she said. But the same is true for you, 7, and your personalities. You all exist in your own aspects, at once, each separate yet a part of the other, occupying the same place, which isn't a place at all. Like the tile, Lydia, for example, her experience is yours. even if you aren't conscious of it. And your experience is hers, if only you can help her realize it. Cypress paused and said, "Even now she's translating your experience in her own way." "Yes, I see," Seven cried, and the courtyards, both of them, disappeared. He was Lydia, yet she was herself, distinct, an old woman strapped in a wheelchair, staring with drug-filled eyes into the faces of her adult children. In Chapter 14, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.